Haney here with RealAgriculture.com, Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Joined right now by Canadian political commentator Paul Wells. Paul, it is great to chat with you.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so you just got off the stage, just finished your keynote. What's the key political message to the Canadian delegation here at Crops Convention?
I think Donald Trump has broken the Canada-U.S. relationship in a durable way. He has walked away from the terms of a trade agreement that he negotiated and signed and called the greatest trade agreement ever. Never mind what you feel about him, how can you trust any agreement with him ever again? And since the Republican Party in the States is made up of better or worse Trump imitators, how can you be sure that a president after Trump would be better? That leaves Canada facing a lot of difficult choices because trade with the United States is easier than trade with anywhere else. Military alliance with America came more automatically than military cooperation somewhere else. But I guess my message to these people was that what's happening right now is not a small thing, it's a big thing.
We seem to be focused a lot on the emotions, like the betrayal, the hurt, our feelings. It seems like we're kind of, as a country, having a hard time getting past that. Need to think more, maybe a little bit more American, and think a little bit more about where the business side of this goes going forward. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree?
I mean, yes, I agree, but I want to give emotions a minute worth of respect. If you live in a small town, you've depended on the fire department to keep you safe for your entire life. And then one day the fire squad comes and shakes you down while your house is burning. You are within your rights to be upset. And Trump never complained about Canada until within the last year. I never complained about Canada in a sort of systematic way.
Yeah, this kind of started in early December.
Well, this is it. And it's this idea that he can take over. And he's actually got some history of taking over. He used to be a slumlord. He used to make life unlivable in apartment buildings that he wanted to buy so that the tenants would leave and he could rent out the apartments for cheaper. Like he used to sued a guy for not paying rent after the guy had paid his rent because it's unpleasant to be sued. This is the kind of stuff he does, you know? And and it's also difficult for Canada it's not obvious what to do next. Trade less with America, trade more with who? Trade more internally, getting rid of internal trade barriers, but you're not going to get a huge economic pop out of that. The studies that show significant benefit for freeing up internal trade also say that the benefit is hard to realize in the short term, that it would be gradual and over time, things like that. Trade with other parts of the world. Canada has tried, going back to Pierre Trudeau. The problem with other parts of the world is you're not as close as the Americans are. Like I spoke to canola farmers. Most of the processing and packaging of Canadian canola happens in the United States. And it makes no sense to move all that to Malaysia, you know? So it's not obvious what the next step forward is.
What's your feeling about what's happening in Canada politically right now? We had a situation where we had Pierre Poilievre with a 20 to 25 point lead. It shrunk down to, depending on which pollster you follow. I talked to David Coletto from Abacus today. I think he said it was about a 9 or 12 point lead. He has a gap still, whereas Ledger and Nick Nanos, it's pretty much a dead heat. What do you make of this rise back of the Liberal Party and what people say will be Mark Carney?
The pollsters disagreed for a minute, and then they spent a month all agreeing, and now they're back to disagreeing. I still think that Pierre Poilievre is likely going to be the Prime Minister at Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
But if he's in trouble, it's because Canadians have had 3 years to get a sense of him. And some Canadians are not convinced that he's the right guy for a serious situation. Mark Carney, I think, realistically, most Canadians know very little about Mark Carney. but he knows about the world, and it's the world that's hurting us right now. And he seems serious and quiet, whereas Poilievre sometimes seems kind of cartoony and loud. And so Poilievre was a great remedy after a decade of Justin Trudeau being sanctimonious and telling you how to think and congratulating himself for stuff that he actually hadn't delivered, right? And Poilievre seemed like a reality check. But just as Trudeau has weaknesses, so does Poilievre, and Carney seems like a really good answer to some of those weaknesses. I have no idea how the next election is going to go. I have no sense of how it should go. Like I don't know who would form the best next government. But it must be really annoying to Poilievre to think that some people are turning back to the Liberal Party because he is so close. You know,
it kind of like within your grasp. Like it's just like you're right there, the mouse and the cheese just the ground shifted on you.
Yeah. But Poilievre says the Prime Minister should get the provinces together to work on stuff. And I think, like, I have a list in my head of all the provincial premiers that he has personally insulted in crass and arrogant ways. Okay, well, if the Prime Minister is supposed to work with the premiers, is he proposing that he be the Prime Minister who works with the premiers? Because he spent 3 years not seeming like he was very interested in working with David Eby, or even with Doug Ford. Or with François Legault in Quebec. So I've spent a lot of my life being a jerk. Very often you realize that you shouldn't have been. And that would be my advice to Poilievre.
Looking ahead in the future, and we don't know what the election looks like. I've had some of our audience in Alberta who have suggested, okay, like, if Carney wins by Thanksgiving is the Prime Minister, it's the same group. A lot of the cabinet supported him. It's just another version of what we've had.
Yeah.
Different resume, but same version. Time to break camp and get out of here. Do you think that we could see kind of a revitalization of the Western separatist movement if Carney is the Prime Minister by Thanksgiving?
I think we certainly would. And the only question is how many friends it would have. There's substantial practical and legal challenges,
right.
You know. But the first thing is would that be... There would certainly be people very angry if the Liberals got reelected. And I've got a lot of sympathy for that feeling. Does that translate into millions of people who want to break the country up? Is this a good time to be breaking the country up? I don't have the answer to that, and I suspect different people will have different answers.
Yeah.
So,
what else? We talked about Trump. We talked about the federal election. What else are you watching right now that interests you politically, or is these two forces taking up all the oxygen in the room?
This is most of it. I'm interested in the whole changing world. So whether Europe is able to deliver serious replacement capability to substitute for an America that doesn't want to protect Europe anymore, whether new leadership figures rise in Europe at this time. I'm probably going to cross the ocean at some point in the next month and go and poke around myself to see what I can find, you know. Because I come from Maclean's Magazine, which took universities in this country very seriously, I'm increasingly fascinated by how politicians are not thinking about universities as a way to deliver economic growth and prosperity for Canada. So Mark Carney and Chrysler Freeland both came out with economic platforms. They both are applying for the job of Prime Minister. And they both went to Harvard and Oxford. And neither of them mentions universities in their economic platforms. Yeah. They don't mention research. I find that fascinating.
And some of the changes that we have on foreign students our academic institutions are in some real tough financial boats right now.
Well, yeah. I mean, almost the only way to get extra income was to educate more international students over the last several years. Because an international student would pay multiples of the tuition that a Canadian student would pay. And now that we overused that and it broke. But there's a sense that universities don't deliver the future that people thought they did. And after a couple years of the Gaza-Israel dispute, which played out in disgraceful ways on too many campuses, a lot of people think that too many people in Canadian universities are not even interested in Canada's future. And that's a big problem. I've been writing about that.
Yeah.
So.
You're right, though. We don't have enough discussion. A lot of times we talk about infrastructure and those interprovincial trade barriers. What can we do? But research is something that probably doesn't come up enough.
Yeah. Or just having a country full of the smart people that get attracted to good universities. And for 15 years, that was an argument that a lot of politicians were interested in listening to, including politicians like Stephen Harper, like not only Liberals. And now it's completely fallen flat. Politicians only talk about universities when they're proposing ways to make it cheaper to go to a university, or when, as Poilievre does sometimes in the Middle Eastern dispute, punishing universities, withholding federal funds if too many people in those places have the wrong opinions. Yeah. And I get the instinct, but I find it a fascinating phenomenon, so I've been writing about it.
To wrap up here, we've been talking a lot about Canada needing to take action. We're really good at talking committees, what we heard documents, restarting because it took 6 years and things may have changed, and missing the action component of that. This audience tomorrow at Crops Convention is going to hear from former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Pretty action-oriented.
Yeah.
I guess how would he fit in today's environment? And you can't talk for him, I know that, but you know the game well. What do you think?
I am sorry that I won't be here to hear Prime Minister Harper. I am a fan. I note that he was a lot quicker to express Canadian outrage at President Trump's actions than Pierre Poilievre has been. This idea, when he said Canada should pay any sacrifice, pay any cost to correct the president's actions, is that's the way that Harper talks. I don't know. If I was, so he's been leading a committee that's looking into changes to the Alberta pensions. Mm-hmm. If I was Pierre Poilievre, I mean, if I was Mark Carney and I was feeling cocky, I would suggest that I would appoint Harper ambassador to Washington or something like that. Harper's enough of a partisan that he would tell Carney to take a hike. But I think Harper represents a seriousness. He wasn't perfect. I wrote books about how he wasn't perfect. But he represents a serious that Canadians miss.
Well put. Paul, it was great to chat with you again. Keep up the great work. How do people find your Substack?
paulwells.substack.com.
Awesome stuff. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.